Hello, welcome. My name is Oliver Ressler. I'm an artist and filmmaker and the curator of this exhibition, Overground Resistance, where this talk today by Vanina Saracino takes place. I'm very happy you took the opportunity to come to Vienna, to stay here for a month and to give a talk in the framework of the exhibition. Vanina is a writer, a curator, and a lecturer. So her work focuses on theories and art strategies that explicitly question anthropocentric and binary worldviews from an intersectional perspective. Wow, super complicated. And she has an emphasis on lands-based and time-based art practices. We also work together on a couple of occasions. For example, Vanina wrote a very interesting contribution for this book I edited, Barricading the Ice Sheets. Copies of the books are also over there at the entrances, so you can check them out. And in the year 2019, Vanina co-curated an edition of the Screen City Biennial in Stavanger in Norway, and she was so kind to present my work on that occasion, and we also had a public talk on that occasion, and yeah. So I think you're also a lecturer, right? Yeah. Yeah. So you're teaching a seminar with the title More Than Human Perspectives and Tentacular Thinking at the Universität der Künste in Berlin. So Vanina, the floor is yours, and please give a warm welcome to Vanina.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks a lot for this presentation. I wanted to thank you for inviting me to do this residency. I've been here for a month, like since the beginning of November, and I will be here for the entire month until the end. And so far it's been really nice, so I thank you very much for this, and also the team of Q21 for the amazing hospitality. Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm very happy also to be here with a very dear friend of mine, Lia Vene, who was also in several residencies with me until now. And as Oliver was saying, I'm a curator, writer. This year I started lecturing as well at UDK, in this seminar that is called More Than Human Perspectives and Tentacular Thinking. So until now my work has been very focused in the past 10 years, I would say, on perspectives, on art strategies really that help us to overcome the anthropocentric thinking and the binary thinking. So somehow inquiring into post-anthropocentric modes of making sense of the world that surrounds us. And I have to say that you, Oliver, and TJ Demos as well, you have been of great inspiration for this other branch of my work that I started a few years ago with you, actually, with the publication and with your inclusion in the Screen City Biennial, working on intersectional resistance and on practices of collective organization somehow. Because the More Than Human is more about the personal shift that we do to understand the world, making sense of the world in a different way, right? But the collective organization is really something that you have been working on for so long, and that TJ has also contributed massively with these books. So I thank you very much for the inspiration. And today what I wanted to speak about was, as you see, the Seen Through Flames, Intersectional Resistance Toward Climate Justice. This is also the title of the seminar that I'm currently doing at UDK. After the first block that I mentioned before with the More Than Human and Tentacular Thinking. Today what I wanted to do is focusing on a few perspectives, a few artistic positions that have something in common and that for me is extremely interesting. The first we will see is Sian Dairit, coming from Manila, the Philippines. Sian has been doing an amazing work of counter-mapping and working with the indigenous communities, with farmer communities really in the Philippines, who are highly oppressed right now and really shot by the police when they try to farm the land that has been taken away from them. And we will see Xian's work in detail later on. Anders Sunna is an artist that you will certainly hear about in the next years. He has been invited this year to represent in 2022 the Sapmi land at the Venice Biennial, together with other 2 artists. And he has an incredible story from guerrilla reindeer herding with his family to really conceiving art as a form of political agitation. And he himself, like Xian Dairit as well, consider themselves activists as well. So they have really a practice that goes beyond the artistic work that we will see. And then we have Bartolina Sciascia from Tilcara in Argentina. Tilcara is in the region of Jujuy, so bordering Bolivia. And Bartolina Sciascia is a persona created by Maximiliano Mamani, who is currently 26 years old, dancer from Argentina, from Jujuy, who uses folklore and folklore dance somehow to criticize certain machist and patriarchal heterosexual sides of these traditions, and somehow bringing back another view on otherness, and using dance really for the empowerment of the dissident bodies that inhabit the region. The 3 artists that we see have one thing in common. They work from what the center considers the periphery. They haven't moved to New York. They haven't moved to any of the cities that are currently considered by the center of the art world, where things are happening. They are really staying anchored in their land, and I think that this is contributing massively to for us to consider the work in a certain way. They are really operating from the fight. And they all try in different ways to retake the space that has been taken away from their communities, either really, like practically, tangibly, reoccupying the space, or with more conceptual cartographies that we will see. I wanted to start, I'm taking this very broadly, but anyway, I wanted to start with this map, because this is the map that we have been using so far since 1569. It's called the Mercator Map, and even though maybe we are super familiar with this map, but this map is in a way wrong, because it, as you see, Greenland here is as big as Africa. Whether it's not like this, Greenland should fit 14 times in the African territory. So we agree on the fact that each map is a distortion, is a simplification, but this form of simplification is really creating a view of the global south or of certain regions of the world as smaller than they really are. And attempts have been done in the direction of changing this map. This is the Peters projection of 1974, in which the shapes of the countries are totally distorted, but at least the proportional dimensions are maintained, right? Another thing that we should be careful about is that the north and the associations that we give to the north and the south are actually they're arbitrary, really, because from space there is no above and no below. So the north could have been the south could have been the north, right? In the weightlessness, in the absence of gravity, we do not have a direction, the direction we have given it. So what I want to say with this, that the convention that the north is up is a convention that has unfortunately strong consequences on the way we feel about the territory and on the way we treat the territory, right? If you think about it, the up is always associated with elevation, with success, and the low with the weight, with something that is less good. And this is really, I really think that this has already set us in a certain way to think about the world in certain terms and not in others. So we start with the Xian Dairit, born 1989 in Manila, Philippines. I wanted to start with this work that is called Et hoc quod nos nescimus. You see in the upper part, Novo Liberalismus Capitalismus, which clearly means new liberalism, capitalism. This is Latin. And the bottom part says the world and what we do not know. We see this map has been inverted, so where the south is presented as the north, and at the same time Xian is using here a very powerful red that is reminiscent of blood, and you see the occupation, the military occupation in the sea, right? This is what we see here is an embroidery that Xian has done together with another artist called Enricus. He's a craftsman that helps Xian with all these embroideries that are very complex to realize, and they are extremely well done. And clearly, the idea of referring to the tapestries is a mockery of Europe. Europe has been using this historically to somehow self-sustain and self-represent its power, right? So in doing this, in using the same language, Xian is trying to somehow subvert the logic and representing space in a different way from the narrative of people who have been really deprived of the possibility to organize a space and of talking about the space. We see also in the upper left and right side the eyes in the triangle, which is kind of an esoteric sign. This is also the Eye of Providence that is presented on the Great Seal of the United States, and that is present also on the $1 bill, I think it is. Yes, it's on the $1 bill. So somehow this God's eye view that is also in a way religion connected with militarization and with the occupation of the land. Another work that I find also extremely interesting is this other map. As you see, Xian works a lot with this inversion of space and counter cartographies for the empowerment of indigenous people. Understanding also that indigenous people in the Philippines is not like we can consider the San indigenous, because everybody is indigenous really in the Philippines, as the artist also says, but there is a strong difference between people who live in the urban environment, in the cities, and people who are living still anchored to their own traditions and still maintaining the ancestral knowledge in the and they work as farmers in the countryside, so to say, on the islands. Philippines being an archipelago of 7,600 islands, more or less. So here we see a detail of the map. Each one of these islands, this is a Southeast Asian archipelago, and each one of the islands is called with the indigenous name. And I will read you what it says. On the upper left side, it says, for the archipelago of Southeast Asia and its indigenous groups. And on the upper right side, it says, in solidarity with the struggle for self-determination and freedom, escaping the clutches of the fascist regime and neoliberal policies. So it's a very explicit language that he uses to talk about these topics. He doesn't really hide anything. And the language that we see here is Tagalog. The Tagalog is it's kind of an imposed mother tongue in the Philippines, because they have so many different idioms that they still speak on a regional level, and the Tagalog has been really somehow imposed to them as a mother tongue. But Xian Dairit comes from the city. He is, as he defined himself during a talk, he is a middle-class city kid. And in a society that is still so divided into classes, this somehow makes a difference. But his work is not a fight from within the struggle. It is a movement. It is an act of solidarization with indigenous communities, with whom he continuously does workshops for this kind of cartography. So he visits the communities, sits, gives paper to the people and tools to write, and asks them to draw the territory so that they can really understand where does a problem, so they can visualize on a map, on an emotional map somehow, how the space is divided and where there are, for example, invisible borders, invisible walls, but that they perceive them in their daily life, right? This is an extremely important part of his work. I wanted to show you also briefly other works of his that maybe do not relate to the maps as we conceive them usually, but these are certainly conceptual maps. So you see here, indigenous culture is rooted in the struggle for land. And this is also fantastic work called The Tree of Life in a State of Decay and Rebirth, where you see actually that, that all the injustices of today's Philippines daily life that you see in the upper part are rooted in imperialism, bureaucratic capitalism, feudalism. And this is also some details of the same image that we have used for this talk with the permission of Sian. This is a work that I like very much. It's called Remedy for Systematic Oppression. And you see 3 tapestries, one depicting capitalism, the other imperialism and feudalism. The 3 of them shows these 3 monsters that are attacking the land. And the remedy for the systematic oppression is what you see on the left and right side, which is Molotov. Simple as that. And in the front of this composition, you have an installation that is part of the entire triptych, done with the teeth. And the book that you see in the middle is the Agrarian Reform. Agrarian Reform is an important document that allows indigenous people, farmers in the Philippines, basically to be respected in their basic human rights. Okay, so that we don't go there and shoot them for farming the land, because the situation is extremely violent at the moment. And the teeth, for sure, are a reference to the fact that people cannot eat, they cannot sustain themselves if we take away the land from them. So this is the composition that he creates, and here you see a detail of this image. Of course, bidimensionally does not have the same effect that it has when you see these tapestries live, but if you happen to know his work or have the possibility to see it, I highly recommend it. This is another work, going back to the more traditional cartographies, in which he has taken one island in the Philippines and somehow recartographed and renamed it among all the possible problems that are happening today. The land which outlives 2021. And this is another example. There is an entire series of this with cartographies of different islands in the Philippines. And this is I hope it's readable. This is a screenshot that I took from a talk that Sian Dairit, who is there in the first image, did with Petra Pötzle in the frame of this exhibition that Petra was curating, called Pleasure Activism. And this is one of the maps that one of the indigenous people, one of the farmers, has drawn, and that basically symbolizes the way he works with these communities. You see, the maps are very different from what he does in his own cartographies, but still, what he wants to give to the people is a tool to reimagine their land and understanding where the problems are, so that they can have a tool, a conceptual tool to fight, and knowing exactly where does the problem lie in their territory. If you're interested in diving into this, there is this article called Countermapping for Resistance and Solidarity in the Philippines that is published under Creative Commons, and you can just download it on this, as part of this book, which is also a fantastic publication from cartographers and artists trying to remap the world with counter narratives, and the website is notanatlas.org. Then we leave the Philippines and we go to the Swedish side of Sápmi. Sápmi is the land of the Sami, as we were saying before. The Sami is an indigenous group, indigenous people, who are spread across the northern territories of Finland, Norway, Sweden, and the region of Murmansk, that is the region of Russia, northern Russia, that borders with Sweden. And Anders is born in 1985 in a family that is a reindeer herding family. If you know something about the Sami people, the reindeer herding is actually the kind of the work that they do. This is what they are. They are reindeer herders, and the Swedish and the Scandinavian governments have done everything in their hand to take away the land from the Sami people and to impede them to continue their practice with reindeer herding, which is the main work that they have, really, the main mean of sustenance that they have. And this is what happened to the family of Anders. In 1986, his family was forbidden to use the mark, the reindeer mark. So each family has a different reindeer mark that it's like a sign of the family that they put on the ear of the calves when they're born, of the small reindeers. And with this, they can recognize which ones are theirs, because maybe you don't know, but the reindeers are not really domestic animals. They cannot really be kept in a place. So Sami people who are reindeer herders are nomadic people. They have to follow the reindeers, and they have to adapt their life and their rhythm to the rhythm of this animal, which is extremely interesting in connection with the post-anthropocentric worldviewing as well, right? There is really a process of becoming reindeer, becoming the animal in this intertwined contact with the other being the animal reindeer, or for the reindeer, the animal human, right? So Anders is really born within this situation of struggle with a family that had to survive somehow, and was doing guerrilla reindeer herding. I like very much this word, meaning that they were still continuing to do their job, regardless the rules of the state. But he really came to discover art as a form of political agitation. So first, doing street art and occupying the street with certain tags and stencil and paintings, and then evolving his practice more and more until doing murals and posters. And we see here one, it's a very ironic but very interesting poster called "Sweden, I'm Your Father." There's also the Norwegian version of it. And we see here Darth Vader from Star Wars depicted like wearing this Sami garments. You see these two different Sami garments, because it's many different communities that have their own ways of dressing, their own tradition, that are mirrored in the clothes that they wear. This is a reminder, strong reminder to the Norwegian and to the Swedish people, who are the fathers and the mothers of the land, and who the land has been ultimately taken from. Anders has taken part in the Biennial of Sydney with this work called Soada. I'm sorry if I mispronounce it. I wanted to show you a bit, this is one of his last pieces, 2020, and I wanted to show you a bit how the narrative is developed in this. You can certainly see how strong this narrative is, how explicit it is, and also how reminiscent of street art practices somehow in the way but maybe you will see it later with other examples. But we see here on the left side a faceless politician who is pouring like toxic green liquid onto the land. A Sami kid on the left side giving him the root finger, and on the other side, since this biennial, this work was created for the Sydney Biennial, we see an Aboriginal figure, Australian Aboriginal figure, who is spanking Captain Cook. And in the back, we see this forest with the European missionaries that are lurking in the forest to try to Christianize everyone. So a very explicit language. Here we have another work. We will help you get rid of your heritage with, again, two faceless politicians showing Sami people the way out of the corral. This is the corral, is where they mark the reindeers, and they're showing the reindeers and the Sami people, the way out of their own land. If you get acquainted with the practice of Anders, you will see that certain elements are recurring: the faceless politicians, the reindeers, sometimes also the reindeers, the human represented with the face of a reindeer as well. We go back here into other works. This is one of the murals that the murals are really impressive, massive, and they are also extremely explicit. We see here a dove with a bomb, basically, with a dynamite. And this artist, I said it before, he will represent Sápmi for the first time, I guess will be represented Sápmi at the Venice Biennial next year, together with other two artists. And here we see the artist. I wanted to show you actually how he does these paintings, because he's very quick in work, and he's very quick and moved by rage. which is something that you can totally see in his work. And he has been collaborating with Sofia Jannok in a music video. And the video is a music video, so it's not to be seen as a video art piece. But I think it's interesting if we look at it a bit to understand how his practice is, how it takes place in the urban space, and how it's connected also to this musical project, also from a Sami musician.
Det är viktigt att här redan inledningsvis konstatera att staten har inte diskriminerat samerna. Frågan är då vad etnicitet är för någonting. Om man nu säger att samer är en etnisk grupp. Och då visar det sig att begreppet etnicitet är mycket omdiskuterat. Den etniska aspekten har inte varit relevant i ett historiskt perspektiv då man skilde mellan nomader, alltså lappar, och bofasta. Hela det arkeologiska material som samebyn åberopat i målet saknar betydelse för tvisten. Staten bestrider i allt fall att samer nämnvärd omfattning uppehållit sig på området före omkring år 1600.
The people that he's painting, the four women, the two different women, one is Elsa Laula Remberg, who is one of the first Sami people who contributed to collective organization in the Sami society against the oppression of the government. And the second, and the other woman is, that you see, is a young Sami person. And this connection somehow symbolizes how two generations should be and are connected in the struggle. Another artist that I find extremely interesting, Maximiliano Mamani, born 1995 in Tilcara, Argentina. Maximiliano has created this persona called Bartolina Sciscia in 2017. And Bartolina is an indigenous woman, actually is an indigenous, for sure, non-binary person. Although Bartolina is, the name Sisa is referring to Bartolina Sisa Vargas, who is one of the revolutionary women, Aymara women, in Bolivia, who really were guiding the struggle against the Spanish government, and unfortunately she was executed by the Spanish troops in Bolivia. And Bartolina wants to make, Maximiliano wants to make art to create discomfort by using something that is the folklore, so something extremely, language that is very traditional for Argentinian people, but that is also tremendously constructed on binary views, right? In the folklore, we see always the man as the dominant, the woman as the submissive, and there are certain rules where the man is guiding. He wants to break all of this with Bartolina Sciscia. Another thing that Maximiliano wants to break is the language, the drag language, because according to him and to all his the video clips that he has watched to do makeup, he realized that in the drag aesthetics, it is very the whiteness is very present, and somehow this is what he wants to go against. Somehow in the drag way of doing makeup, what he realized and what he sustains is that the nose always has to be smaller. There are certain features of the face, there are the white feature of the face that seem to be more appealing than others. And what he wants to say is, no, these are my feature, my indigenous feature, this is the beauty that I want to carry on, and I want to show you how different bodies, how the otherness can be actually can also be considered as beauty. And this is another way of occupying the space and taking the space that has been taken away from the people in Tilcara, in Argentina, through the movement of dance, folklore dance, and reinterpreting this as a dissident body.
Esta vida la que canto sangra de pena y dolor. Las injusticias de siglos siguen en pie y con ardor. Siguen de acampe las luchas, reclaman vivir en paz. Por la ley de territorio, claman por la dignidad. La tierra es de los que luchan.
This sentence is very important, and unfortunately is not, unfortunately is in Spanish, but fortunately I have translated it in English so that we can read it. We are a great metabolism that digests economic consumerism and expels its shit in the peripheries of our world. So pretty explicit as well. We are the garbage that this hygienic and neat world does not want to see. We are the ones who pay the ecological debt of those who squander us and transact in power. If you want to know the Quebrada de Humahuaca, do it where their excrement is deposited. Enter through the act of digestion and find it there, the realities. So Bartolina is retaking space and acting as a dissident body from this dump that we see. This is not a dump that she created for the video. This is a dump that is really there in Tilcara. There are different dumps like this. It's not the only one. And the problem that they have in this region is that, well, of course, that this creates a massive amount of pollution, but also the fact that this is on fire every now and then, probably because somebody puts fire on it. They don't know exactly, but the problem is that the toxic smokes that are liberated through this fire are breathed by this entire community. And this is part of what she sings against, right? We are the trash bin of your neat and clean world. So if you want to come here as a tourist, for example, come and see where the reality lies. So this is so it's a song for empowerment of this from this very situated space. I hope you speak Spanish and you could hear some of the amazing words, because I couldn't find a version with English subtitles, but here you can see some of the sentences in the song. The song is really very powerful and the lyric is incredible. Vidala is a folk song, a typical folk song of the region. And some words that we can hear are like, and I sing against Monsanto. I sing against the corporate capitalism and its operation, and how this has somehow destroyed the land that I inhabit, that we inhabit with our community. And with this, I think that I am done. I wanted to conclude with the fact that these artists, for me, bring forth these incredible strategies, all of them, to subvert those that are the dominant narratives about the space especially, and how do we reorganize the space, or how do we make sense of the space that surrounds us, and how do we reoccupy it with the narratives of the minorities, so with a narrative that is not the one that has been imposed from above, but that can really be from below, from the people who are living in this current situation. And my position for these practices is that maybe a bit naively, but I really think that art can help somehow to make this shift, to help us to see these different things, and that maybe this shift in the long run can be transformed into permanent social change. And this is what I look forward to see, and also the reason why I work in this field, I guess. And come, Oliver. Let's chat.
So, first, thanks a lot for giving us this insight into these artistic productions. I really learned a lot. It was also for me, you could really see how additional information shapes your idea of what an artwork is about. So I knew, for example, Sian Dairit's work and liked kind of the physical materiality of it, but never really knew that how it was created, so that it's done on the basis of workshops with communities in Philippines. And I think that this makes a completely different work out of it, at least for me. Because I have to say that I'm a bit reluctant of works that deal with activism, but somehow use it as a theme and absorb this theme through adding a certain value to the artistic production. And this is something we can see very often in the art field, and I had a bit the idea that this work goes a bit in this direction, and through your talk I learned that my first view might be a wrong one, and that the things are a bit different than I imagined. Yeah, so I also found this very interesting because we are here in the framework of an exhibition, Overground Resistance, which are all works that are by artists who also work in the framework of the climate justice movement, are directly involved in activism. And yeah, it was a bit complicated for me because I accumulated a lot of knowledge and would have had different ideas of artists whom to include, to narrow it down so that it kind of fits towards the space. And the selection of artists now with this additional knowledge I received from your talk might almost appear like a proposal for an extension of what we can see here, of artistic works that would kind of meet the criteria I had for myself as kind of a curator of this show of what to include and what not to include.
Yes, no, I think that what you were saying is actually pretty important, and it's also been my criteria for the selection of the works that I would present, and also for the selection of the works that I present to the students during this Seen Through Flames seminar. I don't believe in practices that use that literally hijack the word activism, that it's today a trendy word in the art field, unfortunately, and that are only operating from the perspective of a white cube, let's say. So I really strongly believe that art that is created with political aims must be seen in the public space and must be available to everyone for free, or as freely as possible. Of course, there are different things to keep into account, like the artists have to sustain themselves. So this is also, of course, some of these artifacts and objects have to enter the circuit of the market, of course. But to me, there must be an implication, a personal implication of the artist in their own in the struggle that they want to present also through art. And I wanted to connect this with what TJ was saying the other day during his talk, that today, unfortunately, is not anymore exclusion the only problem. Today, the problem is inclusion. And what do we make of the things that we include in museums? Some of these practices end up being instrumentalized, tokenized, and so even in the inclusion of works within exhibition spaces, we have to be very careful. What is the discourse? How do we what is the space of inclusion really that is proposed for these practices?
Whereas there's also a certain amount of inclusion in the sense of also instrumentalization, probably to include artists like Anders Sonna in the upcoming Nordic Pavilion in the Venice Biennial. As I assume for the Nordic countries, it's probably something pretty cheap to do this simple political inclusion, while still not giving the same rights and including them as other citizens in the society, right?
True, although I think that it is an important recognition for the land of Sapmi, that next year they will really represent the land at the Venice Biennial. So this is something that goes across what was before the Nordic Pavilion, which was still focused very much on the single countries of Scandinavia. Now the fact that they're calling this Sapmi, and they have called three Sami artists, I think it's already an important recognition of how the museum or the artistic institutions as centers of power of the same, and the creators of the same narrative that has excluded the Sami people in the past, are now shifting their narrative and trying to include them, right? Of course, you're right, I understand your concerns. How do we include a street artist into these practices? But I think that this must be negotiated single by case, like case by case. And in the case of Anders Sunna, he is an artist, practicing as an artist, also practicing as an activist. So it kind of makes sense that he is included in this exhibition, because his practice is across these two branches, right? In which both branches, the art and the activism, become one, and it's not indistinguishable from one another, so to say.
And it's also quite seldom to have an artist who create such beautiful physical objects to really have this direct relation to activism, because if you just look at the surfaces, so they are also quite interesting how they are manufactured, I think, and very often in a lot of artist production we do not have this sensitivity in artistic production, because it's primarily to communicate or so, which I totally understand also, but
I wanted to add something about Sian Dairit. I heard one of the talks in which people were asking him, why don't you bring these works to the street, right, the tapestries? Because why should the tapestries be shown in the white cube and not on the street if this is the message? And he was arguing, interestingly, that these tapestries are too complicated in the language that they develop to be understood within a demonstration, within a manifestation, right? So he does take part in the struggle, but from a different perspective. That is actually the workshop of counter mapping and counter cartographies that he does with the communities. I think there is some question.
I was just wondering whether you both could elaborate on your understanding of activism, because I think your understanding, what I got from the talk, is that a little broader than yours, but maybe you can just share your thoughts on what are the boundaries and what does activism actually mean for both of you.
Do you want to start or do I start? Do I start? Okay. Thanks for this question. It's a question that actually I ask myself over and over, and usually I tend to avoid the word activism when I speak about certain practices, unless the artist is self-defining himself or herself or themselves as artists, as activists, right? And in that case, I'm interested also in seeing what is exactly that these artists are doing on their territory. And in these three cases, I think that we have come across three artists that do feel and do describe themselves as activists, and we have seen how they operate in their land. I think that the word activism has been a bit hijacked today by the art world, and somehow today within the art system it is used in a much broader way. Also, some artists, as you were saying, are defining themselves as activists, whether actually their activism is taking place from a perspective of white cube, so not really engaging with the collective organization and the struggle, but really just staying in the studio and doing works that certainly address the struggle, but it's not the same, because the risk here is that of staying within an epistemic bubble, so that we show these works in an exhibition to people that are already in agreement with what we are saying mostly, right? Maybe they would discover more in detail certain stories, but these people still know they are on your side. And the struggle really has to be taken outside the museums. So the reason why this seminar and my seminar at UDK is called Intersectional Resistance toward Climate Justice is because I usually don't refer to activism, but talk about intersectional resistance, because this sounds to me a little bit more precise in describing what is done from the artistic perspective and how artists can really operate to provoke a shift in our ways of making sense of the world. Have I responded? Yeah. Maybe now is your turn.
Yeah, I mean, there's this certain tendency in the art field, I think, to highlight also artists who pretend links to activism and also use different forms of participatory practices. So, I mean, one example of those artists might be maybe Thomas Hirschhorn, who I think uses a lot techniques of inclusion and participation, while I think not really being connected to social movements, and tries to increase his symbolic capital as an artist through using kind of a visual language we find in activism. And this is something I would reject, and this is something that from the very beginning I excluded from including such positions in this exhibition. I think it would be much easier also to find certain artists who deal with certain themes, such as climate destruction, or climate breakdown, than to find artists who are actively involved in the counter movements. And but I think this is what's required, right? And for me, because if I understood the question right, you also asked for a definition of what I understand of activism, or what we understand of activism. I mean, for me, it has, I mean, the main actors of activism, or where activism takes place, is, I think, in social movements. And therefore, these have to be actors who have direct connections to social movements. And yeah.
Well, one example is this book called What About Activism, that has been recently published by Sternberg Press. And people who are saying their opinion about activism are Hans-Ulrich Obrist, Ute Metabauer, Hu Han-Ru. And in the statement in the introduction to this book, the editor states that he has called the most important directors and most important museum directors, really, and persons in the art field to talk about activism. So already in this publication there is this this statement, right? How why my question to him when I had the chance to discuss about this book with him in New York, I was asking him, why do you think that Hans-Ulrich Obrist would be a person, an expert to talk about activism, right? And his answer was a joke. It was obviously a joke, but it was also not. It was, well, he's very active. Which we cannot argue against that. Of course, he's very active. But for me, this joke, that was clearly a joke, because the person who who edited the book is also a very serious writer. Nevertheless, this joke somehow makes you understand how the art may somehow enlarge or consider activism in a much broader way than we considered it from the street, so to say.
And I think there was only one contributor, as far as I remember. Maybe there are more, but Nato Thompson maybe was the only one who has a direct relation, and who over years tried to establish a platform that brought together people from the art scene and from the field of activism in order to develop something out of it. And so he invented this format of the Creative Times Summit that at the beginning took place in New York, but later on also in other cities, and which I would really consider one of the major platforms that enabled protagonists from the art field, political protagonists of the art field, and activists and theorists to meet together and to engage. I think we had another question.
I think it connects nicely to what you said, because I'm still not convinced where the activism is. So if activism is taking the artwork out of the white cube into the public space to be seen there, activism is obviously more than watching or seeing, and being part of the movement, where's the subversive, the transformative element in even the work shown here that would legitimately qualify as part of an activist movement? Because activism, in the end, or in its origin or its purpose, is action and change, transformation in some regard. I'm not arguing that these works should achieve something, but what is
the relationship of the communities towards these works. Do the Filipino farmers actually need these maps? Don't they experience invisible boundaries day after day? The reindeer people, the Sami people. Where are they in these works? What do the works do for them? And in an aspect, what goes beyond the aestheticization of waste dumping in the South?
Yes, I think this is a very good question, and the thing is that if I had shown you Sian Dairit in manifestations, maybe this would have convinced you more that but I chose to show only the works because I'm a curator, so I'm interested in working with artists, and I thought that it would be more interesting here within the space of an exhibition where we find ourselves, somehow to reflect on the works themselves, rather than showing the artist on the street struggling. But I assure you that all these artists are taking part in the fight personally. Not just with art, but we saw how they somehow merged these two practices in their life. Regarding the question of how this is received by the community, Sian works a lot with the people that maybe in your opinion do not need the maps, but in his opinion, people and the way they have also responded to this, they really, the maps really help them to have a visualization of how they do relate to the space, and to think the space in terms of cartography of resistance, right? And Sian is also affiliated to several human rights organizations. The thing is that he cannot disclose too many informations about it, because since farmers in the Philippines are shot to death, literally, to farm illegally, so to say, certain territories, there are also certain information that he prefers not to disclose directly. But he is highly implicated with the communities that with whom he organizes and creates this counter mapping, and I think that that his example was strong. The fact of Anders Sunna, well, he is born within a family that is forced to do guerrilla reindeer herding because they have been forbidden to do reindeer herding legally by the state. So he is personally living the struggle of not being able to work, and he has been an activist since even before he became an artist. And we can argue that guerrilla reindeer herding is a pretty strong way of activism, I think.
I was expecting that his art is with the animals.
But there are animals in his art, I would say, because he represents them.
Sorry? It looked like an MTV music video.
Yeah, but this was just some sort of this is a music video, actually. This was not a video art, and I said this when I presented this. This is not a work of art. This has to be seen only as the recording of an action that he did in public space, in the space where the reindeers are in this case, and that has been used as the official video of this singer, of this Sami singer, in her music. But it's not a work of art. Yeah. But in his paintings, there are these ones, and in these murals, he definitely brings in the stories of the Sami and of his own struggle. I think when you see here the faceless politicians showing Sami people and the reindeers, the way out of their corral, this is something that he has experienced and has lived personally. And somehow he reflects all this personal experience in this artwork. Then I can agree with you, what is this doing for the community? Maybe nothing, but this is, art. Then what is art doing? So art is operating as a drop in the ocean, right? But still, he is doing something that can help people to empower a certain narrative and to offer a counter narrative to the dominant one. And the dominant one is that the state has never oppressed the Sami people, right? So this, sorry?
A transformative element that induces some form of transformation in the struggle to which it claims to be associated with. And if the program is inclusion, I think sometimes it also means saying no. The video is the best example of activist art being co-opted, appropriated, incorporated into the surface machine.
Yeah, but this is hardly pop art. I mean, I think you're making a mistake here in considering this video as a super famous video. I mean, we're speaking about emerging artists doing everything with their own means, and it doesn't really look like even a video that is highly produced, right? What do you need to produce a video like this today? An artist painting and a phone to record it. It's not a video that has entered the massive production of, you know, the Universal or anything. We're speaking about really emerging artists, young people who are today doing these works. And I have to. I'm not in agreement with you, because I think that if you put a mural like this in a city, in a country where when everyone is convinced, because the dominant narrative is that the government does not do anything to Sami people, and then you put something like this in public space, this is going to send a pretty strong message, I think, to people. And this is something that everyone is going to see. People who are also people who are not getting into museums. So is actually really occupying the public space in a strong way.